Thank you for tuning in to Koppen Comic. I'm Brian Koppen with comic Christine Ferrera. Christine Ferrera, how the hell are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm having a problem. I mean, I think your last name is pretty common, except I just cannot say it with any sort of distinction or diction. Ferrera.
Well, it's sort of a common last name, but it's this spelling is not common. It's usually
Uh,
Ferrara or
uh,
Ferrari or things like Ferrero, stuff like that. But anyway, we're Ferrera.
Okay, I think when I say it quickly, there's just too many R's for me. So that's my problem. That's my cross to bear. And so we follow Christine Ferrera. She's ChristineFerrera.net on the old WW, but also on Twitter, Christy Ferrera, and on Instagram, Chrissy.Ferrera. So Christine Ferrera, today we're going to talk about something wonderful. We're going to talk about feminism because I've never talked about it ever. I've done hundreds of episodes with hundreds of comedians, and yet none of them have forced me to talk about feminism, and you didn't. But I have people supply topics, and I'm like, I'm not talking about that. Has nobody proposed this? Tell me about feminism. Like, what the hell is it? What's your take on it? How can you make it funny, etc.
Wow. I mean, it's such a sort of a broad topic like feminism, but just out of curiosity, have you just never talked about it even in your own life or
Yeah, I don't know that I have. Like back in the day, in school and stuff, like feminism was a really, big topic that was, discussed in, the halls of academia, etc. But like once I got out of college, I suppose what's interesting is like, they talk about how it's evolved over time. And so kind of what is the angle that you're interested in about feminism? Because like you said,
Well,
it's a big old topic.
yeah, it is massive. And I'm of a certain generation, which would be Generation X, which is older. So for me, like, growing up in the 90s, feminism was we had words like feminazi, and it
Yes.
was very closely related to anger and hostility. And I would say feminism was always related to things that were distinctly not fun, and sort
I
of
want to be
like,
paid more. I want to be treated as an equal. Right?
yeah, and like I don't want to be assaulted, if possible, things like that. So it kind of got, I feel like in the 90s it had this really bad reputation of being feminists were angry people. I mean, just the word
Yeah.
feminazi is so, I mean, it's not exactly flattering
Yeah, that's the
to,
worst.
and so I think a lot of women of my generation didn't really want to be associated with it because it's such a drag in a way. But I
You're dragging
always,
down my party, feminazi.
yeah.
You're like, we're trying to fight for equal rights
Like,
here.
who
I mean,
invited the feminazi to the party? Yeah. And so I always thought about it in terms of like the most powerful thing is humor. And so if you and speaking of academia, I did write my master's thesis was called Funny Art Women, which is about women who use comedy and humor to kind of get their feminist viewpoint across,
oh,
but in a
cool.
way that it's much more palatable. Like if you're
Yeah.
funny, like someone like Maria Bamford was kind of huge for me because she's not like overtly political about it, but she is really funny. And so she has a lot of sway and power, and
Yeah.
people listen to her, and not just women, And
Yeah. Because if
so,
we're
like,
laughing, you've already disarmed us. You've already taken our defenses net down. If we're laughing, we're kind of able to kind of hold hands. Like until you take that wall down, we'll never hold
right.
hands ever. And so if you get us laughing, that's how you kind of get your message in secretly. So I love that. Like you're coming from I'm 44, so I'm probably Gen X too. And it's like you're coming from a generation where it was such a drag, man. But now it's like through comedy, you're finding a palatable way. But it's just kind of sad that anybody would have to do that. Like should you have to, you have a
Right.
perfect stand-up routine to kind of get people to think that women should get an equal pay or whatever?
Yeah, but also, yeah, exactly. And it is, I agree that it is not cool that you have to sort of make your make yourself palatable to the rest of the world, i.e. the hierarchy of patriarchy or whatever it is. But I feel like that was something that sort of transformed in the 90s and the early aughts, is that. And so I feel like the sort of younger group of feminists, I think now we're calling it fourth wave. I can't remember if we're still we're either in third wave or fourth wave, and I
Gotta
can't
know your
remember
waves.
which.
Gotta know your waves, Christine. If
Yeah,
you want to be taken seriously as a feminist thinker, you better know your waves.
you do have to know your waves. And so but the younger generation is just totally unapologetic about it. And I'm not saying that somebody like Maria Bamford or other comics of that generation were apologetic about it. It's just, I think they just did it the way that they did it. And then now we have like millennials and Gen Zs who are, just maybe a little more straightforward about politics. I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, meaning they don't feel
not,
they need to cloak it in a joke or whatever. They can kind of just come off with that as here's my ideology. I don't gotta cloak it in a joke. Let's go from there and be funny. But like I was just watching Cobra Kai the other day, and this Moon character, I don't know, she's like, she's talking about men and women or something, and somebody goes, that's sexist or something. She goes, no, feminism can be sex positive now or something. And so when you see things like lipstick feminism and sex positivity and stuff, how do the contemporary thinkers kind of talk about it? I mean, not comedians, but just like, so I mean, people are going on TikToks and probably doing front face videos about how women are the best, which of course they are. Like what's the current thinking on feminism? Is it okay to be sex positive? It's okay to be body positive. Like, what's the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but the way I see it evolving, it's interesting to me because, especially talking about things like body positivity or, gender fluidity and all those kinds of things, it's like those are newer conversations well, actually, no, they're not. Like, they've always been part of the conversation since I was alive or since I was young. But it's just constantly evolving. So it's like, if you think about it, it was only like 10 or 15 years ago that we were literally having the conversation, are women funny? Think about that. That was like that was like, when was that? 2007-ish to 2012-ish or whatever, or like, who can tell rape jokes or things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like the conversation is constantly evolving, but I would say that it's interesting, some of the topics that have stayed the same in terms of like the conversation is different, but the topic is still there, because I think there's been conversation around body positivity and representation and diversity and gender fluidity for a while now. It's just that the conversation is constantly changing. So
yeah, but
I don't know, it's interesting.
Some old school feminists would get in trouble if they speak the same way. Like you said, the concepts are always the same. Treat women, equally because they're humans, etc. And like, of course, that goes without saying. But then, like, some people who've been saying it for decades and been labeled a feminazi in the '70s, they could say the same fucking sentence now and get in trouble with the exact words if they're not cognizant about the fact that certain trans women or gender fluid people in general might have a problem with how things are discussed. Because isn't what's her name, like the turf? Who's the Harry Potter chick?
Oh, the Harry
It's
Potter
like,
lady,
you can
yeah.
be trans exclusionary feminist. And I guess that's what
Yeah.
turf means. And like, get into some real fucking trouble where she's like, yeah, I mean, women should have rights unless you were born with a dick, like, what the fuck is that? Like, so some of these people can get into real trouble, right?
Oh,
If they don't
yeah.
speak slightly more, less ignorantly, I guess.
Right. And I think that and it's not necessarily along generational lines, but the turf thing does somewhat seem to be like people of a certain generation, like boomers or whatever, and probably even some Gen X. But I think I don't know that much about it. And I know I'm not like a Harry Potter person, so I don't know. But I think that comes out of a fear, and it's like this fear of a certain type of like a certain type of feminist who is afraid that, like, we've already had a hard time as women. And so, like, I don't know if it's like a fear of not wanting to share the equality or something. I don't know where that fear
You don't
comes
want to
from, but
share. Well, everybody has a fear of sharing,
to me,
but
but to me, it's just like with everything, it's like nobody's equal unless everybody's equal.
yeah,
So it doesn't do you any good to be exclusionary in any way, shape, or form. And also, to me, those kinds of conversations are interesting because it's also like there's a difference between like women and femininity. Like there's a difference between gender and sexual orientation and all these things. Like just for example, I feel like in the 90s when I was sort of looking to women who were older than me as an example, like a lot of outspoken feminists were like these, like I said before, feminazis. So they're like these tough, angry, just ready to go at it, just like these basically tough broads, you know what I mean?
real drags in the
And the
party.
thing
Let me
is, it's
tell you.
like, and it seems like the feminists of that era were kind of really masculine, to be honest. And it was kind of like this thing of, yeah, you can be accepted or equal as a woman as long as you're kind of projecting a hyper masculinity, which is
Yeah,
to say that, that's where I talk about the difference between angry women and, to me, what I think of as much more feminist is funny women. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And it's like this, I mean, I don't have a problem with anger, but it is sort of this thing of projecting like a masculinity, and that makes you more acceptable somehow to
Yeah,
men. It's like men can respect that, or the patriarchy can deal with that. Like they know, and so basically it's almost like a preference of not men versus women, but actual masculinity versus femininity, or just femme qualities in general. Do you know what I mean?
that's probably lipstick feminism too, right? Where it's like
Yeah,
you
it's
can
like,
dress like a woman, you can dress like a feminine woman and still be a badass bitch, right?
yeah.
But then I guess, well, I mean that like, like the question I have, because I was like lipstick lesbian. I was like, did I say lipstick feminism or lipstick lesbian? It got me to thinking about the interplay, like in the evolution of men getting used to women having a say and equality and stuff. I wonder if the acceptance of lesbianism coincided because like when you're a man and you're brought up just with men and women and typical gender roles as older people were, like you were shocked. I mean, now I'm just like, I don't know if I was ever shocked, but it's like, because women are the most attractive sex, period. But just like, you were shocked that like some women would not be into any fucking dude, no matter how hot or awesome the dude. And so, like, I think some people in the old school probably were just like, oh, like, once they started getting used to kind of same sex, whatever, and the fact that lesbians could just be totally like, we have no use for you as a man. Like, I wonder if that person got more open to like, oh shit, we're not even in their worldview at all. Like, oh my gosh,
Right.
like, well, women don't have to depend on a man if she doesn't even fucking need a man for, procreation or to support or whatever. So I just wonder what the coincidence or, where in the evolution of feminism or gender equality or whatever came the whole like lesbianism as like the awareness of lesbianism, you know. And it's like, so
Right.
yeah, do you have any thoughts on like, yeah, because you said like sexual gender, sexual orientation, sexual presentation, they're all different. Like, do you see the interplay in any of these LGBTQ issues in toward vis-a-vis or with respect to the evolution of feminism or gender equality?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it all goes hand in hand. And I mean, I guess I should say, like, I'm a hetero cis white female. So
Cis het
I
white,
don't
white,
know.
yeah.
I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure that informs my worldview. And I don't even know that I necessarily the most qualified to speak on these topics. But for me, I just feel like it's kind of like an all boats rise situation, which is like when I think of growing up in the 70s and 80s and people, like when you first sort of start becoming aware, but it's like back then it was so different. So one thing we have to remember is that, to come out as lesbian or gay or queer in general in the 70s and 80s was quite a different thing than it is now. And I'm not saying it's easy now. I don't think it's still not easy, but I mean, back when there were actual laws against it and you could be risking your life, and that like a lot of lesbians would get beat up all the time. I mean, there weren't a lot of like clubs or places to gather, and the ones that would actually get raided all the time. People would get beat up by the cops, or just I mean, and of course there's still hate crimes going on, but for me, I just feel like you see it makes sense to me that if you were a lesbian, let's just say, for example, a lesbian in that era, that yeah, you might be really protective of your identity, and you might be you might be sort of a little exclusionary or mistrusting of men or straight people in general, and
Yeah.
so it makes sense to me. And then I think part of the evolution is, as hopefully everything is trending towards tolerance, part of the evolution is that, like, to me it's just like this thing. That's why the trans exclusionary feminists drive me crazy and really makes me sad, because it's like it's like all the marginalized groups being pitted against each other,
Yeah.
whereas we really shouldn't be. We should all be on each other's side, you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe that's the
We
point. It's like pit them against each other so that nobody gets more money. And what's her name? J.K. Rowling, she could just take all the money. She's like, I already made it, guys.
Yeah, and it's
I just have to
literally
shut. I'm gonna have to become a billionaire. And so how am I gonna do this? I have to make sure that everybody else, is pitted against each other. And so let me make a couple, cute tweets here about turf shit. Everybody will argue, and I'll just keep being a billionaire, right?
right. I mean, it's literally how power stays
Yeah.
entrenched,
Well, before,
and
yeah, I mean, and I think, did you have a show on this? Because I'm looking at one totally hilarious thing about ChristineFerrera.net, but also Chrissy Ferrera, and I suppose probably, yeah, also Chrissy.Ferrera on Instagram. Like, like you had a show called Cats, Criminals, and something, and you have this cat mask, and you do this little dance. Like, did that? Yeah, tell me about. Yeah, I got to get the title here.
oh
Cats,
yeah, it's
Criminals, Comedians. Tell me about that show, and were we able to see you dance in this really hypnotic fashion with a big cat mask on? And where the fuck did you get that cat mask?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, that I just did that show in November in New York as part
Yeah,
of a experimental theater festival. It's
nice.
called Cats, Criminals, and Comedians, which it's funny you bring it up, because the title is from an essay by Freud. So
Oh,
Freud wrote this essay called On Narcissism, which is about, where he says something, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something to the effect of, women, beasts of prey. And he says, women, beasts of prey, humorists, and outlaws live outside of the confines of society, because so he literally puts women in the same category as cats or beasts of prey,
oh no.
criminals or outlaws, and humorists, and which I changed to comedians, meaning that, like, I mean, he wrote this over 100 years ago, so it's like we can give him a little leeway on that, but it's basically like how women have to live outside the norms of society, because basically their only place in society is either somebody's daughter or somebody's wife. This
Oh
is back when,
no.
before women had the vote, when women were basically property. So I took that quote from Freud. I'm sorry, I wish I had the actual quote in front of me. I feel like I'm just paraphrasing, but so I turned it into this it's kind of like a fake academic lecture. I do it as a lecture,
Okay.
and it's basically about women artists who, using that as a jumping off point, it's like a history of feminist art,
Okay.
and it's completely made up. So it's like all these artists, these women artists throughout history, who do all manner of ridiculous performances. Like, just for a quick example, there's a woman in the 60s whose performance is just crying, and then she just fills up vials with her own tears
And
and
you just made her up?
yeah, I made it up. um yeah, she's the crying artist, or and so every artist is sort of a different representation of like the oppression of gender, like the sort of patriarchy of Western European art. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I come from a fine art background, so I'm pretty well versed in this. And so I've performed that show about a dozen times. I did it recently in New York, like I said, but I debuted it in Baltimore, where I used to live.
Okay.
And a lot of my professors came, and the director of the Baltimore Museum of Art came and was literally, I have to brag, she was literally weeping and said,
Yes.
"This is my whole life. This is my whole life."
What pull quote is that? That's amazing.
Yeah.
You gotta check these things out, because you see this hypnotic rhythmic dancing with this cat mask on. You could see it at ChristineFerrera.net, Chrissy Ferrera on Twitter, and I'm gonna be retweeting all this stuff, including the cat dancing, and Chrissy.Ferrera on Instagram. Christine Ferrera, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you. This was so fun.